The bell above the door gave a thin, tired sound when Eleanor Harrow pushed it open. She stood 5'3" in shoes she had resoled twice, and the garment bag she carried over her left arm weighed almost nothing. Dust motes spun in the morning light that cut through Larkin Pawn Recovery's front window, illuminating rows of power tools, a guitar missing its third string, and a glass case of watches no one would ever collect. Nell set the garment bag on the counter with the care of someone placing flowers on a headstone. Behind the register, Ethan Larkin looked up from a clipboard. His shirt was pressed, his tie knotted with the kind of precision that suggested a mirror check twice. He smiled the way a man smiles when he already knows the answer to the question he is about to ask. "Mrs. Harrow, wasn't expecting you until Thursday." "Miss," Nell corrected. She unzipped the bag with fingers that were slightly crooked at the second knuckle. Decades of pushing leather through industrial sewing machines had reshaped them permanently. "And I'm not here about Thursday." She drew the vest out slowly. Black leather, heavy gauge, the kind that had been cut for a man with broad shoulders and a longer torso. Road dust had settled into every crease, turning the surface from black to a dull pewter gray. 2 patches remained on the back, a winged compass above the words Iron Ridge Riders MC, and below it, in a rocker, the single word Founding. Ethan's pen stopped moving. Nell laid the vest flat and smoothed it once, palm passing over the chest. On the left breast, a rectangle of stitched leather bore a name in silver thread, faded but legible. Cal Northstar Harrow. "I need $1,200, she said. "That stops the auction notice you sent me 6 days ago." Ethan set the clipboard down. "Miss Harrow, that vest, vintage or not, isn't going to appraise at anywhere near. I know what it's worth to the right buyer." Her voice was low, unhurried, and carried the particular sharpness of someone who never repeated herself. "I'm asking what it's worth to you." The bell rang again. Gabriel Mercer had to turn his shoulders slightly to clear the doorframe. He wore a riding jacket unzipped over a gray thermal, boots still carrying the smell of highway rubber from the roadside assist. He had just finished 3 blocks south. He was here for a set of metric wrenches the shop had listed online. Club business. Minor errand. Nothing more. He thumbed his phone off and looked up. His gaze passed over the old woman, over the counter, and landed on the vest. On the name tag. On the faded silver thread that spelled a word the Iron Ridge Riders had not spoken aloud in 27 years. Rook's boots stopped on the linoleum as though the floor had turned to cement. For 3 full seconds he did not breathe. Then his hand came up, not to touch the vest, but to grip the edge of the counter as if the room had shifted beneath him. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out quieter than he intended. Nell did not turn around. "It belonged to my brother." Rook's jaw tightened. He looked at Ethan, then back at the vest, then at the small woman whose posture had not changed by a single degree. "Ma'am." He stepped forward. "Whatever you owe, I'll cover it. Right now? You don't need to leave that here." Nell placed her hand flat on the vest, directly over the name tag, and finally turned to face him. Her eyes were pale blue and entirely steady. "I'm not here to sell it," she said. "I only wanted to see if anyone still remembered what they owe him." The silence in Larkin Pawn Recovery lasted long enough for the dust motes to complete a full rotation in the morning light. Ethan cleared his throat. "If there's no transaction, I'll need the counter space." "There's a transaction," Nell said, without looking at him. She studied Rook's face, the scar bisecting his right eyebrow, the recognition he could not hide. "Just not the one either of you expected." She zipped the garment bag closed and tucked it back over her arm. From her coat pocket, she produced a single folded sheet, a property lien notice bearing the letterhead of DL Holdings, LLC. "My house goes to auction in 9 days, she said. "The company pushing it is registered to this address." She glanced once around the pawn shop. "So I thought I'd start here." She walked past Rook, and the bell gave its tired sound again as the door swung shut behind her. Rook did not follow immediately. He stood with both hands on the counter, staring at the space where the vest had lain, and when he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Cal Northstar." Ethan's smile had not returned. He busied himself with the clipboard, but his pen left no marks. Rook caught up with her on the sidewalk, 3 storefronts down, where the awning of a closed hardware store provided shade. She was waiting, not sitting, not leaning, simply standing with the garment bag held against her chest like a shield. "You knew I'd be there," he said. I knew someone from the club rides past that shop every Tuesday and Thursday. Maintenance run. She adjusted the bag. I didn't know it would be you specifically, but I recognized the patch. He exhaled. Miss Harrow. Nell. Nell. I want to help. Then help correctly. She looked up at him without any softness designed to make him comfortable. I wrote to your club 11 times over 27 years. Registered mail. I have every receipt and every returned envelope. Not once did anyone open a single letter. The words landed like a slap he could not deflect. I didn't know, he said. That's the problem. He drove a flatbed tow truck for his roadside business. It was parked 2 blocks south. He offered her a ride. Not on a motorcycle, not standing in the wind. A proper seat, a proper belt, a proper door. She accepted without thanking him, and they rode in silence to the Iron Ridge Riders Clubhouse on the eastern edge of Ash Creek. The clubhouse was a converted machine shop with a corrugated roof and a walled yard where a dozen motorcycles sat in a neat row. Rook keyed the side entrance and led Nell through a hallway lined with framed photographs to a back room marked archives. He called Mara Bishop on the way. She arrived 14 minutes later in a sedan that smelled faintly of coffee and tax forms, a leather satchel over her shoulder, and a yellow legal pad already in hand. Show me, Mara said, pulling a chair out for Nell and then taking one for herself. Nell unzipped the garment bag one more time. She turned the vest over, found the left interior panel, and pressed her thumbnail along a seam that ran parallel to the lining. The stitching was invisible to anyone who had not spent 40 years behind an industrial singer. I sewed this pocket in 1996, she said. Cal asked me to. He said he needed something that couldn't fall out on the road. She worked the seam open with a precision that made Mara hold her breath and withdrew a small rectangle of carbon paper, a bank deposit slip, the kind that left a blue duplicate. The date was 27 years old. The receiving account was stamped with a name, DL Holdings. Mara's pen stopped. Rook leaned forward. That's the same company on your lien notice. Yes. From the same coat pocket that had held the lien notice, Nell produced a rubber-banded stack of envelopes. Each one bore a return TO sender stamp, a registered mail receipt taped to the back, and a date written in Nell's small, precise handwriting. 11 letters, she said. The first was sent 8 months after Cal's funeral. The last was sent 3 years ago. Everyone explained what was in this vest. Everyone asked for a formal review. Mara picked up the nearest envelope and turned it over. The return address was the Iron Ridge Riders Clubhouse. This building. The stamp read refused. Return to sender. Who refused them? Mara asked. Rook looked at the envelope as though it might bite him. Whoever handled mail 27 years ago. That would have been the sergeant-at-arms. But I became president 9 years ago. The last 3 should have come across my desk. They didn't, Nell said simply. The silence filled the archive room like cold water. Mara set down the envelope and picked up her legal pad. Nell, walk me through the original accusation against Cal. From the beginning. Nell folded her hands on the table. In 1997, $32,000 disappeared from the club's mutual aid fund. The vote to expel Cal happened 11 days later. He was dead within the year, loss of focus on the road, according to the police report. I was never contacted, never consulted, never told where his belongings went. I found the vest in a storage unit 6 months after his funeral. Rook's hand had moved to cover his mouth. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I was 19. I'd been a prospect for 6 months. Cal was, he stopped. Started again. Cal was the one who pulled me out of a ditch on Route 9 when my front tire blew at 60. He stayed with me until the ambulance came. Talked to me the whole time, so I wouldn't pass out. I know, Nell said. He wrote about it in a letter to me. I voted with the others. Rook's hand dropped to the table. I didn't understand the finances. I trusted the men who said they had proof. Which men? Dean Larkin, the original treasurer. Mara wrote the name without looking up. Ethan Larkin's father? Yes. Nell smoothed the vest on the table, one hand passing over the name tag the way a person touches a photograph of someone they can no longer hold. Then I'd like your club to do what it should have done 27 years ago. Open the books. Follow the money. And when you find what I already know you'll find, I want it said out loud, in a place where it becomes a record that can't be returned to sender. Rook looked at Mara. Mara looked at the bank slip. I'll need access to the sealed financial archives from 1996 in 1997, Mara said. Rook nodded once. You'll have it tonight. Nell stood, tucked the vest back into its bag, and buttoned her coat. I'd like to go home now. I have thread to sort. Rook drove her back in the flatbed, and neither of them spoke until he pulled up to a narrow, clapboard house with a porch light that flickered once before holding steady. Nell, he said as she opened the door. I'm sorry about the letters. She paused with one foot on the running board. Sorry is a start. It isn't a finish. Then she stepped down, crossed the yard, and disappeared behind a door that closed without slamming. Mara spent the next morning at her accounting office with a photocopied set of the sealed ledgers spread across 2 desks. By noon she had mapped the funds outflows for the quarter in question. For large withdrawals, each routed to an account number that matched the carbon slip from Cal's vest. At 1:15, she drove to the Ash Creek County Public Records office with Nell in the passenger seat and a folder of printed queries in her satchel. Rook followed on his touring bike, a dark green machine built for distance, not spectacle, and locked it at the far end of the public lot before joining them at the front steps. The registrar's office smelled of old paper and toner. A clerk with reading glasses on a beaded chain pulled 3 binders of corporate filings when Mara submitted her request. DL Holdings, LLC had been registered 31 years ago by Dean Allen Larkin. Its stated purpose was property management. It had never filed a tax return indicating active revenue, yet it had never been dissolved, either. When Dean Larkin died 12 years ago, the registered agent changed to Ethan Marcus Larkin. Annual continuation fees had been paid without interruption. It's not dormant, Mara said, running her finger down a column of filings. He's been using it. Look, 4 new lien acquisitions in the last 18 months alone. All residential. All within Ash Creek Township. Nell leaned over the binder. Her crooked index finger stopped on a notary seal. This number, she said. I've seen it before. She opened her purse, a practical thing with a brass clasp, and withdrew a thin stack of payment receipts held together by a binder clip. Utility bills, property tax notices, a mortgage satisfaction letter from 2004. At the bottom was a lien assignment notice dated 14 months earlier. The notary seal bore the same 6-digit number as the corporate filing. Same notary, Mara said. Same document preparer. He didn't just inherit the company. He's actively using it as a vehicle to acquire properties under financial stress. Rook's jaw was set. Let me talk to him. No. Mara said it flatly, without looking up. If you confront him now, he moves the paper trail. Files a correction. Claims clerical error. We need every document time-stamped and witnessed before he knows we're looking. Nell nodded once. She's right. Rook exhaled through his nose and said nothing. He stood with his arms folded, watching the 2 women work through binder after binder, and for the first time in a long career of saying I'll handle it, he let someone else set the pace. By 3 o'clock, they had photocopied 14 pages of corporate filings, debt assignments, and continuation reports. Mara organized them into a chronological folder and labeled it with a date range and a single word, holdings. On the drive back, Nell sat in Mara's passenger seat and watched the road ahead. His father stole $32,000 and let my brother take the blame. His son is using the same shell to take my house. 27 years, and the Larkins never stopped profiting from Cal's silence. Mara glanced sideways. We're going to need more than corporate filings. We need the bank's internal records to prove the money that left the club fund arrived in the same account. And we need to prove Cal couldn't have made those transfers. I know where that proof is, Nell said. But you'll need to convince a man who's spent 27 years convincing himself it doesn't exist. Owen Bell's repair shop had been closed for 6 years, but the sign still hung over the bay doors. Bell's Son's Cycle Repair. The ampersand faded to a ghost. There had never been any sons. It was the kind of lie a lonely man tells the future. Rook had called ahead. Owen refused. Nell had called second. Owen did not refuse. He simply did not answer. So they drove out in Rook's flatbed, Mara and Nell in the cab, and found Owen standing in the gravel lot with a mug of coffee and the posture of a man waiting for a storm he could not outrun. He was 63, shoulders permanently rounded from decades of leaning over engine blocks, and his eyes moved to the garment bag in Nell's arms the way a compass needle moves toward north. I figured somebody'd come eventually, Owen said. Didn't think it'd take this long. They sat inside the shop on mismatched stools, surrounded by the smell of old oil and rust. Owen listened to Mara's summary of the evidence without interrupting, turning his coffee mug in slow circles. When she finished, he set the mug down and walked to the back of the shop, where a row of metal filing cabinets stood against the wall like soldiers waiting to be dismissed. He opened the third drawer of the second cabinet and pulled out a cardboard box sealed with packing tape that had gone yellow with age. Cal's ride logs, he said. He kept them like a trucker keeps manifests. Every departure, every fuel stop, every highway marker. He left these with me a week before the vote. Owen set the box on the workbench. Said if anything happened, I should give them to someone who'd read them. Mara opened the box. Inside were spiral-bound notebooks, 6 of them, filled with Cal's handwriting. Dates, mileage readings, and tucked between the pages, paper-clipped receipts from toll plazas and fuel stations. Mara found the relevant week in the third notebook. On the date the first withdrawal was made from the Mutual Aid Fund, Cal had logged himself on Interstate 78, westbound, 180 miles from Ash Creek. A toll receipt confirmed his passage at 2:47 p.m. A parts store in Carver City had his signature on a pickup slip at 4:15 p.m., a replacement voltage regulator for a fellow rider whose bike had broken down during a charity run. He couldn't have been at the bank, Mara said. He was physically impossible to be in 2 places. Owen nodded without meeting anyone's eyes. Rook stood at the edge of the workbench, both hands flat on the surface. He had not spoken since they arrived. Now he did. Owen, why didn't you show these at the vote? Owen's gaze dropped to his coffee mug. Because Dean stood up at that meeting and said he had Cal's signature on withdrawal slips. And his voice cracked like a dry hinge. I figured if Dean had paper, what good was a toll receipt? I told myself the logs could be wrong. I told myself Cal might have come back early. I told myself a dozen things because telling myself the truth meant standing up in front of every man I rode with and calling the treasurer a liar. The shop was silent except for the tick of a cooling engine somewhere outside. There's something else, Rook said. His voice was low and flat, the voice of a man pulling a bandage off a wound that never healed. The backup ledger. When I was a prospect, Dean asked me to hold the spare key. Said it was protocol. In case anything happened to him, a second person could access the records. I gave it back a month after Cal was expelled. But for 3 months before that, Dean had access to everything, and he knew I had the other key. Mara looked up from the notebook. Meaning if the backup ledger showed irregularities, Dean could claim you were involved too. Yeah. Rook's knuckles were white against the workbench. Cal knew. He told me once, said, "Don't worry, kid, I'll sort it before it touches you." I didn't understand what he meant until it was too late. Nell had been silent through all of this. She sat with the garment bag on her lap, one hand resting on the name tag through the fabric. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but carried the weight of a closing door. Cal protected you, and you let them destroy his name. Rook could not look at her. Yes. Owen stared at the floor. Then both of you know what has to happen next, Nell said. And it doesn't happen in a back room. The meeting took place 2 days later in the Iron Ridge Riders' main hall, a long room with exposed beams, a table built from reclaimed oak, and framed road maps covering every wall. 14 voting members sat around the table. Rook stood at the head. Mara had prepared a summary binder for each seat. Nell was not in the room. She had declined to attend. I'll hear what you decide, she told Mara by phone. But I won't sit in a room full of people debating whether my brother deserves his name back, as if it's a favor. Rook presented the evidence. The bank slip from the vest, the corporate filings linking DL Holdings to Dean Larkin, the toll receipts proving Cal's absence, and his own admission about the backup key. Mara walked the members through the timeline with a precision that left no room for ambiguity. The debate lasted 40 minutes. The majority position crystallized quickly: pay off Nell's lien, restore Cal's membership posthumously in the internal records, and handle the Ethan Larkin situation through a private demand letter. No public statement. No hearing. No acknowledgement beyond these walls. We fix it, said a gray-haired member named Dawes. We fix it fast, we fix it clean, and we don't hang our own laundry where the whole county can read it. Rook hesitated. For a moment, a long, weighted moment, he almost agreed. It was the path of least pain, the path that kept the club's image intact. All in favor? He asked. 12 hands rose. Only Mara abstained. Rook drove to Nell's house that evening. Mara came with him. They sat on the porch. Nell did not invite them inside, and Rook explained the offer. Full financial relief, internal restoration of Cal's name, and a formal apology delivered in person by the entire leadership. Nell listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked past him at the street, where the flatbed was parked beneath a sycamore tree losing its first autumn leaves. No, she said. Rook leaned forward. Nell, this solves the house. It clears Cal's name. It clears his name in a room I'm not allowed to enter, on a record no one outside that room will ever read. She turned her gaze back to him. My brother spent a year being called a thief by every person in this town who knew him. He lost his patch, his friendships, and then his life. A private apology is just another way of keeping the secret. What do you want? Rook asked. I want it said where it can't be unsaid. I want a public record. Mara spoke softly. There's a county licensing hearing scheduled for next week. Larkin Pawn Recovery's commercial license is up for renewal. Public comment is allowed. Nell nodded. Then that's where it happens. Rook sat back. For a long moment he said nothing, his jaw working silently. Then, the club voted differently. The club voted for comfort, Nell said. You asked me what I want. I told you. She stood, signaling that the conversation was finished. Rook and Mara descended the porch steps, and Nell's voice followed them into the dark. Rook. He turned. If you can't stand with me in public, then don't stand with me at all. I've had enough of quiet allies. The porch light flickered, steadied, and went out as she closed the door. 2 hours later, a sedan pulled up to Nell's curb. Ethan Larkin emerged with a leather portfolio and a smile calibrated for concern. He knocked twice, gently. Nell opened the door, but did not unlatch the screen. Miss Harrow, I realize the timing is unusual. Ethan's voice was warm, measured, and controlled. But I've prepared a resolution that I think benefits everyone. May I? He slid a document through the gap between the screen door and the frame. Nell took it, adjusted her reading glasses, and scanned the page. It was an offer to release the property lien in full, with no payment required. In exchange, Nell would surrender the leather vest and all associated documents, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and withdraw any pending public comments related to DL Holdings or Larkin Pawn Recovery. At the bottom of the first page, in the legal description of the documents to be surrendered, was a reference number. Nell recognized it instantly. It was the serial code from the 27-year-old bank deposit slip. The one sewn into Cal's vest. The one only visible if you knew where to look. He knew. He had always known. No, she said. Ethan's smile did not waver. Take a day to consider. The offer expires at close of business Friday. It won't take me a day. Nell folded the document and placed it in the pocket of her housecoat. I've already submitted my public comment request for the licensing hearing on Tuesday. For the first time, something behind Ethan's eyes shifted, a flicker of recalculation, quick and cold. Miss Harrow, these proceedings can be stressful for someone. Good night, Mr. Larkin. She closed the inner door. The deadbolt turned. Ethan Larkin stood on the porch for a full 10 seconds before descending the steps, his portfolio tucked under one arm, his stride a fraction faster than when he had arrived. Mara came to Nell's house the next morning with 2 coffees and a formal records request she had filed with the Ash Creek Credit Union. They sat in the sewing room, a small space at the back of the house where an industrial singer occupied the center table, surrounded by racks of thread arranged by weight and color. I need to ask you something, Mara said, setting her coffee on a folded piece of muslin. Nell fed a strip of leather through the machine without looking up. Ask. You chose that specific pawnshop on a Tuesday. You knew the club's maintenance schedule. You positioned yourself at the counter with the vest displayed at exactly the right moment. Mara paused. This wasn't chance. Nell's foot eased off the pedal. The machine went silent. No, she said. It wasn't. She turned on her stool to face Mara directly. I wrote 11 letters. Not one was opened. I called the clubhouse 4 times over the years. Each time I was told the matter was closed. Last spring, when the lien notice arrived and I saw the name DL Holdings, I understood that no one was going to come to me. So I went to them. You could have walked into the clubhouse directly and been turned away at the door by someone who didn't recognize my name. Nell's voice held no bitterness, only the flat certainty of experience. I needed a public space. I needed the vest visible. And I needed someone who would recognize Cal's patch before they could decide it was easier to look away. Mara wrote nothing. She simply listened. I didn't know it would be Rook, Nell continued. But I knew it would be someone. And whoever it was would have to choose, in that moment, whether to pretend they hadn't seen it. The sewing room was quiet for a long moment. Then Mara said, "You should tell Rook this." "Why?" "Because right now he thinks he's rescuing you. And if he keeps thinking that, he'll make decisions for you instead of with you. He needs to understand that you've been the one moving pieces." Nell considered this. Then she nodded. "A single, precise movement. Tell him he can come by this afternoon. But he knocks. And he waits." Rook arrived at 3 o'clock. He knocked. He waited. Nell opened the door and led him to the sewing room, where Mara was already seated with the formal records approval from the credit union spread across the cutting table. Nell told him everything, the planning, the timing, the deliberate choice of location. Rook stood by the window, arms crossed, and listened without interrupting. When she finished, something shifted in his posture, a loosening, as though a weight he had been carrying improperly had finally been redistributed. "You didn't need me to start this," he said. "No, I needed you to finish it. There's a difference." He uncrossed his arms. "Then tell me how you want us to stand with you." It was the first time he had asked instead of offered. Nell reached for the vest, which hung on a padded hanger beside the singer. She turned it inside out and pointed to a line of reinforcement stitching along the lower back panel, the kind of repair only a professional would notice. Cal used to write route numbers on scraps and tuck them in here when his notebook was full. I found 3 when I opened the lining. She produced a small envelope. Inside were 3 slips of paper, each bearing a series of numbers in Cal's handwriting, a route designation, a date, and what appeared to be a 6-digit bank reference code. Mara took the slips with gloved fingers, a habit from handling tax documents, and compared them to the credit union records that had arrived that morning. "These reference numbers match internal transfer codes," she said after a moment. Cal was tracking the outflows. He was building his own case. "He never finished it," Nell said. "He was waiting for one more piece, the backup ledger entry that would prove who authorized the transfers. He thought if he had everything, no one could dismiss it." She paused. "But they dismissed him anyway, before he was ready." Mara aligned the route slips beside the toll receipts from Owen's box, the bank deposit carbon from the vest, and the corporate filing dates from the county records. The timeline assembled itself like tumblers falling into place. Each transfer date matched a day when Cal was provably absent. Each bank code appeared in DL Holdings' deposit history, and the backup ledger numbers corresponded to entries that only someone with the spare key could have accessed. "This is a closed loop," Mara said quietly. "Every piece confirms the others." Dean Larkin made the transfers, routed them through his own shell company, and used Cal's absence as cover. When the discrepancy was discovered, he pointed at the man who wasn't there to defend himself. Rook's hands were at his sides, fingers curling and uncurling as though grasping for something to fix. "And I gave him the key that made it possible," he said. "You were 19, Mara said. "That's an explanation. It's not an excuse." Nell looked at him with something that was not quite forgiveness, but was perhaps its first cousin, acknowledgement. "No, it's not. But saying it out loud, where it counts, will be." She placed the vest back on its hanger with the same care she gave every piece of leather that passed through her hands. "Tuesday," she said. "The hearing is Tuesday." The Ash Creek County Administrative Building was a 2-story structure of brown brick with a flagpole out front and a parking lot designed for 30 cars. On Tuesday morning, it held 57. 14 motorcycles occupied the designated motorcycle spaces at the east end of the lot, touring bikes and cruisers, all parked in a neat row, all with helmets secured to passenger rails. The riders who dismounted them wore clean jeans and unpatched jackets. They walked single file through the main entrance, passed through the metal detector without incident, and took seats in the public gallery of Hearing Room B. They did not block the doors. They did not speak loudly. They did not wear colors. But every person in that room knew who they were. Nell arrived with Mara in Mara's sedan. She wore a navy cardigan over a white blouse, her gray hair pinned the same way she pinned it every morning of her life. She carried a single folder and the garment bag. The hearing was nominally about the renewal of Larkin Pawn Recovery's commercial operating license. Under county procedure, Any registered resident could submit public comment regarding a licensee's compliance with local business ordinances, including fair dealing, proper documentation, and truthful representation. Nell had filed her public comment request 5 days earlier. It was the first item on the docket after the licensee's opening statement. Ethan Larkin sat at the respondent's table with an attorney, a man in a charcoal suit who conveyed competence and mild boredom in equal measure. Ethan's tie was perfectly knotted. His expression was one of patient tolerance. The hearing officer, a woman named Patricia Clyde, gray-haired and reading-glassed, called the room to order and invited Nell to the podium. Nell stood, walked to the front of the room, and placed her folder on the lectern. "My name is Eleanor Harrow," she began. "I am 74 years old. I have lived in Ash Creek for 51 years. I am here to present evidence that DL Holdings, LLC, a company operated from the same address as Larkin Pawn Recovery and by the same individual, has engaged in a pattern of acquiring property liens from vulnerable homeowners using procedures that originate in a 27-year-old financial fraud." Ethan's attorney leaned over and whispered. Ethan's expression did not change, but his right hand moved beneath the table. Nell spoke for 4 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not editorialize. She laid out the connection between DL Holdings and the Iron Ridge Riders Mutual Aid Fund theft with the same precision she used to cut a pattern from a hide of leather, one line at a time, each one measured. When she finished, Mara arose and approached the hearing officer's bench with a bound evidence packet, 43 pages of photocopied records, each one stamped and dated by the issuing authority. "These are public records, Your Honor," Mara said. "Corporate filings, debt transfer documents, bank reference numbers, toll receipts, and ride logs. Each piece was obtained through standard requests from county records, the Ash Creek Credit Union, and state highway archives. I have prepared a timeline summary on the first page." Hearing Officer Clyde accepted the packet, adjusted her glasses, and spent 2 full minutes reading the summary in silence. The room did not breathe. Ethan's attorney stood. "Your Honor, this is a licensing hearing, not a criminal proceeding. Ms. Harrow's claims are relevant to the question of whether the licensee has operated in compliance with fair dealing standards," Clyde said without looking up. "Sit down, counselor." He sat. Clyde looked at Nell. "Do you have witnesses?" "I do." Owen Bell stood from the 3rd row of the gallery. He walked to the front of the room with the stiff gait of a man whose body ached in every joint, and he did not look at the row of riders as he passed. "My name is Owen Bell," he said. "I was a member of the Iron Ridge Riders from 1989 to 2001. I was present when Calvin Harrow was accused of stealing from the Mutual Aid Fund. I had in my possession Cal's personal ride logs, which proved he was 180 miles away on the dates the transfers occurred. I did not present them. I did not speak up. I chose silence because I was afraid of being called disloyal." He paused. His hands gripped the edges of the lectern. "I've been afraid for 27 years. I'm done being afraid." He returned to his seat. The gallery was silent. Clyde made a note. "Any other witnesses?" Rook stood. He was the tallest person in the room, and when he walked to the podium, every rider in the gallery tracked him with their eyes. "My name is Gabriel Mercer. I am the current president of the Iron Ridge Riders Motorcycle Club. In 1997, when I was 19 years old and a probationary member, I was given custody of a backup key to the club's financial ledger by the then-treasurer, Dean Larkin. I did not understand the significance of that access. I returned the key after Cal Harrow was expelled, but during the months I held it, Dean Larkin had unrestricted ability to alter entries in the backup ledger and attribute transactions to others." He paused. His voice was steady, but his right hand pressed flat against the podium as though anchoring himself. "I voted to expel Cal Harrow. I did so without examining the evidence myself. I trusted a man who was stealing from us, and in doing so, I helped destroy the reputation of the man who had saved my life. That is a failure I cannot undo. But I can acknowledge it publicly, and I can confirm that every document in Miss Harrow's evidence packet is consistent with the club's internal records, which I have authorized our financial officer to share with the appropriate investigative authority." He stepped back. His boots were loud in the silence. Ethan's attorney rose again. "Your Honor, these are allegations of historical misconduct by a deceased individual. My client." "Your client," Clyde interrupted. is the registered agent of DL Holdings, LLC, and has been for 12 years. Your client filed a property lien against Miss Harrow's residence using that entity, and the evidence presented suggests that entity's original capitalization derived from misappropriated funds. She removed her glasses. I am not a criminal court, but I am empowered to act on questions of licensee fitness. She paused, replaced her glasses, and made 3 notes in quick succession. Effective immediately, I am suspending the commercial operating license of Larkin Pawn Recovery, pending a full compliance review. I am ordering a stay on any pending property actions filed by DL Holdings within this county, and I am referring the evidentiary packet to the county prosecutor's office for review regarding potential financial fraud. She looked at Ethan. You are free to retain counsel and respond through proper channels, Mr. Larkin. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down once, a clean, decisive sound. Nell stood at the podium and did not move for a long moment. Mara touched her elbow gently. In the gallery, 14 riders remained seated, perfectly still, until every other person had left the room. Then they stood, replaced their chairs, and filed out in the same single line in which they had entered. No one cheered. No one shouted. But as Nell walked past the row of motorcycles in the parking lot, Rook fell into step beside her, not ahead of her, not behind her, and said nothing at all. And that silence, for the first time in 27 years, meant something entirely different from what it used to mean. 6 weeks passed. The county prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation into DL Holdings. Ethan Larkin's attorney filed a motion to dismiss, which was denied. The lien on Nell's house was voided by court order. Her property tax, which she had never missed a payment on until DL Holdings manufactured a dispute, was confirmed current. Nell did not celebrate. She went back to her sewing room and finished the jacket she had been working on before all of this began. A custom piece for a woman in town who needed a riding jacket altered to accommodate a shoulder that no longer moved the way it used to. On a Thursday in late autumn, a letter arrived at Nell's house. Not a bill, not a notice. An invitation written on Iron Ridge Rider's letterhead, signed by Rook and countersigned by Mara in her capacity as club secretary. It asked, not told, not assumed, whether Nell would be willing to attend a brief ceremony at the clubhouse at a time of her choosing. Nell called Mara that afternoon. What kind of ceremony? A restoration, Mara said. Cal's name goes back on the membership roll. His patch designation is formally reinstated. And there's a display case in the archive room. New glass, new lighting. Rook wants to put the vest there, if you'll allow it, along with the full record of what happened, including the parts that make the club look bad. Especially those parts, Nell said. That's what I told him you'd say. The clubhouse archive room had been repainted. The old filing cabinets were gone, replaced by a wall-mounted display case with museum-grade glass and soft interior lighting. Beside it hung a framed timeline, Mara's work, that detailed the 1997 expulsion, the evidence of Dean Larkin's theft, the club's failure to investigate, and the 27 years of ignored correspondence. Nell arrived in a sedan driven by Mara. Rook met her at the door, not the side entrance this time, but the front, and offered his arm for the 3 steps up to the threshold. She took it without comment. 14 members stood in the archive room. Owen was among them, though he kept to the back and did not speak until spoken to. Rook did not give a speech. He read a single paragraph from a document that had been voted on unanimously the previous week. The Iron Ridge Riders Motorcycle Club formally acknowledges that Calvin Northstar Harrow was wrongfully expelled in 1997 on the basis of fraudulent evidence presented by then-Treasurer Dean A. Larkin. The club failed to conduct an independent investigation, ignored exculpatory evidence, and refused correspondence from Mr. Harrow's surviving family for 27 years. This record is permanent, public, and cannot be sealed, altered, or removed by any future vote. He set the document in the display case beside the vest, which Nell had cleaned and conditioned with her own hands, the leather supple again, the silver thread of the name tag catching the light. The returned letters went in next, still in their envelopes. Then the ride logs. Then a printed copy of the hearing transcript. Nell stood before the case and said nothing for a long time. One hand rose and pressed against the glass, fingertips aligned with the place where Cal's name tag sat behind it. No one interrupted her. When she turned back to the room, her eyes were dry, But something in her posture had changed, a tension released, a weight redistributed. Not gone, never gone, but shared, now, in a way it had not been before. There's one more thing, she said. From her bag, she withdrew a second vest, older, more worn, with a patch that read Road Captain and a name tag that said Rook. It was the vest Rook had retired 5 years ago when the leather finally gave out along the shoulder seams. You left this at a shop in Millfield for disposal, Nell said. The owner is a client of mine. She saved it. She held it out. I restitched the shoulders and replaced the lining. It'll last another 20 years if you treat it right. Rook took the vest with both hands. He looked at it, then at her. I didn't ask you to do this, he said. No, you didn't. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but its nearest relative. Consider it a professional courtesy. From one leather worker to another. He nodded. Words, for once, were insufficient. Beside the display case, mounted at eye level, was a small brass plaque that had not been there when Nell arrived. It read, North Star Relief Fund. Established in memory of Calvin Harrow. First independent audit report, on file. Mara had insisted on the audit clause. The fund would be managed by an outside accountant, not a club member, with annual reports available to any member or family member who requested them. It was a small thing, a procedural thing, the kind of thing that would never make a headline. But it meant that what happened to Cal could not happen again through the same door. Nell left the clubhouse at 4:15. The autumn light was golden and low, and the row of motorcycles in the yard cast long shadows across the gravel. Mara drove her home. They did not talk much, just two women in a car, the radio turned low, the road familiar. At her front door, Nell paused with her key in the lock. Mara. Yeah. Thank you for reading the numbers. Mara smiled. Thank you for keeping them. The door opened. The sewing machine waited inside, threaded and ready. Nell hung her coat, turned on the work light, and sat down at the singer. There was a jacket to finish. There was always a jacket to finish. And on the wall beside her cutting table, in a small frame she had hung that morning, was a photograph of Cal at 25, leaning against a motorcycle she no longer remembered the model of, squinting into sunlight, one hand raised in a wave that seemed, at this distance, to be saying, I knew you'd get here eventually. The porch light held steady. It did not flicker,